Praise the Lord, guys. I'm Shaw Greenhorn. And when they were come nigh unto Jerusalem, unto Bethany and Bethpage, by the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent forth 12 of his disciples, saying, Go you over into the village over against you. And when you be entered in, straightway you shall find a colt tied. Loose it and bring it unto me. And if any man shall say unto you, What do ye? Loosen the colt. Say that the Lord hath need of him, and straightway he shall send him. So they went in and found the colt tied by the door without, in the path in which two ways meet. And when those that stood around saw them loosening the colt, they said, Why do you loosen the colt? And they said unto them, even as Jesus had commanded, and they let them go. So here's an introductory to Jesus, riding in on the donkey. Hosanna, in the highest. And if you understand, this moment is about to, highlight the peak, I would say, of his fame. Before it began to decline and they started to say, crucify him, give us Barabbas. We saw another instance in which way earlier where the Bible says that and they would have came and made him king. They would have forced him to be king, but he slipped away out of their presence. So as Jesus, he goes around and he does his thing, right? So he's casting out devils. Nowhere from the Old Testament up until now have we seen this kind of ministry. This is really something Jesus came and implemented that was brand new. Nowhere have we seen, we've seen leprosy healed. We've seen people brought back from the dead, Elijah. And, we've seen Jesus heal so many things, the blind, the deaf, the dumb, the lame, which we haven't seen in the Old Testament. If I was to reflect and look at the Old Testament, I would say all we saw was people brought back from the dead people, and they were both by Elijah, I believe. And then, Naaman the Syrian, leprosy, the healing of bodily defects, blindness, deafness, unable to speak, and the casting out of devils. We just goes to ask you a question. How many of these, spirits hid in the camp of Israel? How many people, even after they came into the promised land, were demon possessed and they never saw any relief? This wasn't a ministry that was done. 'Cause, people suffer in silence, daily. They go through things. And, medicine, even though medicine was limited in those days, diagnoses were limited, medication was limited, treatments were limited, very limited. You would have these people suffering these things that were really, spirit mediated. They were spirit implemented, brought on by some unclean, spirit that somehow came through a door. Would it be something the person did? Would it be a generational door, something their grand or their great great grand did, and that kind of just stood in the bloodline? So here, like I said, he's at the peak of his fame. This was actually prophesied from the Old Testament. I forget which prophet wrote it. That behold, Zion, tell the daughter of Zion that her king cometh unto her meek and lowly, riding upon an ass and upon a colt, the fall of an ass. And I always say that things are not perfectly repeated throughout each four gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. In this one, we only see the colt being mentioned, not the ass. I just came from Matthew, where both of them were mentioned, and you can accept it as a general rule. Wherever any one of these books, it gives more specific information, then you could go with that. A lot of times things are repeated just to maintain the timeline to give you an idea of the flow of things. Only the colt is mentioned here, but in the other gospels, it is the colt and the ass. It's both of them. So this is done to show his humility. I guess compared to like a chariot, something more grandiose and more pompous, something that king would use to carry himself around the city. So we see them coming onto the Mount of Olives. If you read where they come to take him and what. All right, so they did the Last Supper and the communion before they went out to the Garden of Gethsemane. And in describing the Garden of Gethsemane, the Mount of Olives was mentioned like it was a part of the same place. So that's where they took him, and then the whole questioning and whipping, spitting in his face, smiting him, the taunting. That's really where it began at the palace of the high priest. They took him straight from the Garden of Gethsemane to the palace of the high priest. So Bethany and Bethpage is also mentioned. And it's the first time we're seeing it. This wasn't a place I believe that they went to before, previously. Many places they went to once, many places they actually went back, twice, and they had such a great, reception because, those that received their miracles, they went and they spread the word. And, everybody that had something showed up. Can you imagine, having things wrong with you that they can't even give you a diagnosis, Jesus being able to heal? So we see him sending his disciples over into the next, village over against them, telling them that as soon as they come, they shall find, this colt tied. So since the ass is left out, the donkey, one can, deduce that the colt was the most important thing. Because like I said, the prophecy, it says, he cometh riding upon an ass, and upon a colt the fall of an ass. Both of them are mentioned being ridden upon, but the colt is mentioned last. Why did he need two animals? Ultimately, even though only one is mentioned here. Special emphasis is given to the fact that nobody had yet sat upon these animals. Like, if in those days, animals were everything. Job being one of the richest, wealthiest men, when his riches were described, they were described in sheep and goats. Abraham, from the slaughter of the five kings, when they took, I believe he was his nephew or cousin, Lot, and he went back and rescued him. Animals was a big part of the wealth. In those days, they really did either raise animals or they did the farming, with the crops. These animals were often used to help till soil. So nobody had ever sat upon this, colt. And I imagine that this colt was never used to bear any burden, any heavy lifting, or preparing the soil, dragging. I forget what that thing is called. It's so heavy when the animal drags it, it breaks up the soil so that able to be fertilized, and then the seed being planted. So how does one in those days? The question can be asked: how does one in those days have an animal that grows, of a big enough size to be able to carry a grown man, Jesus? And yet no man has sat upon it, and I'm just throwing it out there. No man has used it to bear any burdens. Things of the Lord. God, He has a way of preserving things that He has for a special purpose. Moses was born during a time where an official order from Pharaoh was given to drown all the male children. God preserved Moses, knowing the great deliverance that he would bring to his people. As a matter of fact, he grew up under Pharaoh, the very man that was supposed to be killing him. Grew up in the palace, being raised by Pharaoh's daughter, calling him her own. God preserved Moses throughout all this. Noah and his family during the flood. God hiding Samson until it was time for him to use him, against the Philistines, and everything that he accomplished. So this, cult, imagine that an angel maybe was assigned to it. Every time someone was about to sit on it, something would happen. They would get called away. They would remember that they had something to do. They would just change their mind. So something was, assigned to this animal. We saw in the Old Testament where when the prophet disobeyed God and he went to the king that wanted to curse the Israelites when they were coming out of Egypt, the angel of the Lord stood in the way with a sword ready to slay him. But the donkey was able to see it and turn away. Then after he smote the donkey, the Lord opened his mouth and it spoke. So this, we can take a lesson from this right here, that the Lord, He really will assign, providence unto the purposes that, He has. Mary, behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son. God, He preserved her throughout, every accidental encounter that might have happened. How many, females get sexually molested by family members, uncles and cousins and stuff like that, parents, friends. We saw them bring unto Him the woman taken in adultery, who said that Mary couldn't have fallen to one of these things. The woman by the well, who said that she couldn't have ended up in her shoes. Mary Magdalene, Rahab the harlot. She was of the parental lineage of Jesus. Rahab made Boaz, who made, Obed, who made, Jesse, who made David. So, we see where Jesus, vessel. What is a vessel? A vessel is something that's used to carry something. So all his vessels really were untouched. His mother Mary was untouched. Bible says, Joseph knew her not until she had brought forth her firstborn, son, and they called his name Jesus. This donkey was untouched. He said, never a man sat. He gives, instructions on how to answer the people, because, who are you to be coming, taking my animal? What do you loosen in the colt? He told them, tell him that the Lord had need of him, and straightway they will understand. So now, this word was sent, from Jesus himself to have a specific impact. Because, in those days, how many, animal thieves were there? Why would you let a complete stranger take your animal, who you don't know? How you going to get it back when you're done with it? You didn't take an address. Well, at least the address is not mentioned. I'm pretty sure maybe they, made some arrangement on how to get it back to the person. But say the Lord hath need of him. So now you know how God works. He works in dreams. He works, through inspiration. There could have been an angel assigned to that word that would bring peace into these men's heart, that will allow them to let the animal live. Maybe he was, warned in a dream. We saw God warn, when Abraham's wife was taken by Abimelech and by Pharaoh. The Lord spoke unto them in dreams when he was afraid that they would kill him and take his wife, for she was so beautiful. Jacob, when he stole away with Leah and Rachel, not telling their father Laban, and then he pursued after him. The Lord spake unto Laban by dream, saying, "See that thou say neither good nor evil unto Jacob." So these men, it's not specifically stated, why this word allowed them to live with this animal. But if you can imagine, either God spoke to them by dream, or there was an angel that went with this word, or God's presence went with this word. That as soon as it was mentioned to them, you ever had deja vu? You ever had a feeling that something, you couldn't explain it, but something brought great peace onto you? Maybe you met a person for the first time and you could just tell that this relationship is going to be so great. Something went to prevent these men from saying no. And I could sit here and reason 100 things, but know that something went with these two disciples. And it doesn't mention which two it was. We know that Judas bear the money bag. Yeah, did he send one of his main guys, Peter, James, or John? None of the gospels, I say that, what you don't find in one gospel, you find in the other. And neither of these four gospels tell you which two disciples went. So he sent them, ahead in the way, and he gave them the word. Tell him that the Lord hath need of him. The location of the animal was given as soon as you be entered into the city. It is said that they found him, by the door in the place where two ways meet. This goes to show you that the gate of the city is what they meant by the door. Now, if you know, in a city, these cities were really, I like to say enclosed, if that's the right word I'm looking for, because that's why he said it's easier for a camel to go to the eye of the needle, because at night when the main gate was closed, then there was a side gate, and this is the eye of the needle, which it was hard for a camel to pass through. It had to unload pretty much everything that it was carrying just to be able to fit single file through this gate. So imagine that as big as this city is, there's gonna be arrangements of houses, just like we have in modern society, where we have streets and avenues, houses being next to each other, and then there'll be like a clear path. The way where two ways meet means that different avenues, they converge at this location, being only one exit out of the city. Now, the fact that this animal would be right there at the gate of the city, you could call that providence. Like I said, if it was by dream and the Lord told them to wait there specifically, maybe it was just all orchestrated as it went. These men just felt a reason to go by the gate of the city. Maybe it was a regular thing. Maybe at that time they usually were there. But then I would raise the question again, how comes nobody had ever sat on this animal? And that really goes to show you that God, he will preserve things that needed to be preserved for us, a certain purpose. We'll see where, for example, even in buying a house, like 100 people will come and look on the house, but the one person who God has it for, when they show up, they might not even pay as much as the others were offering, and everything does work so smoothly for them. That's why it's good to be a child of God. That's why it's good to be under his leadership and care and direction and guidance, because you see, in the things that are up for grabs, he works it out. He has a more special attention that he pays to you. All right, so let's get into these scriptures. It starts out saying, "And when they were come nigh unto Jerusalem, by Bethany and Bethpage, unto the Mount of Olives, he sent forth 12 of his disciples and said unto them." So like I said, now we're here unto Jerusalem. This is about maybe the third time at least that I can count that we're nigh unto Jerusalem. Well, it actually said nigh unto Jerusalem, Bethany and Bethpage, the Mount of Olives. Like I said about the Mount of Olives, that's close to the Garden of Gethsemane, where when he prayed his, where he said, first of all, Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. He found the disciples sleeping, their eyes were heavy with sleep, where he prayed and his sweat became as drops of blood. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, when he said, thou shalt not forswear thyself, swear not by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Jerusalem was actually called the city of David, if I'm not mistaken. And you know how David had that special place in his heart, for the Lord. He wrote pretty much, almost all of the Psalms that we have come to love and so much revere. God, he often says, when a city was given trouble, he would often say, though David, Abraham, Moses, and he would list some, these guys' names. Noah. Though these men were in the city, their righteousness would only deliver themselves, just as only Lot, righteousness delivered him from Sodom. Everybody else perished. So the weight that goes with these guys, their name. The last thing we just saw him do was the healing of blind Bartimaeus. They rebuked him when he heard Jesus of Nazareth passing by, and he began to cry out, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. But he cried out the more. Jesus called for him. He got his healing. We just saw where he just took them and began to show them how he would go up to Jerusalem and be rejected of the chief priests and scribes and be condemned to death and be delivered unto the Gentiles. The Gentiles being the only one authorized to put him to death by crucifixion, because they had said that it is not, in our law for us to put anyone to death, by this manner, because it was, destined that he be crucified and not stoned. If it was a manner of stoning, they could have just, when they arrested him, they could have just stoned him at the high priest's palace. And, why crucifixion and not stoning? Because the Bible says that he became a curse for us. The Bible says, written, cursed is anyone that hangeth on a tree. And they were so afraid of this curse that they took them down before the sun went down. That's how afraid of it they were. So he became that curse. He took our place. Because, in the garden when man sinned, that was our destiny. And he took that for us so that we might, receive his life. So, he is, God in the flesh. One could ask, how did he get this information that the donkey would be where it would be? Prophets, if the Lord God spoke to Moses face to face, how much more would he speak to his son? This is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased. The voice came from the cloud when he got baptized, when he was transfigured in the mountain. And then a third time when he said, when he said, Father, glorify my name. The Father said, I have already glorified it and I will glorify it again. In the old days of Israel, the prophet was literally called the seer, because they were able to see. They were considered able to see certain things. I guess just like a voodoo priest would, a tarot card reader, a tea leaf reader, astrologists that use, demonic channels to get information. All right, so the next one says, and he said unto them, go you over into the village over against you. And when you be entered, straightway you shall find a colt tied. Loose him and bring him unto me. Like I said, it's really the two. It's really the ass and the colt. The ass was referred to as her, and the colt was referred to as him. So it's the older one is female and the younger one is male. So as soon as you be entered into the city, you shall find a colt tied. Go you over into the city over against you. That's another way of saying go to the next city, the next one that comes next. And as soon as you be entered, so we see them not having to do much searching for this animal. This kind of reminds you of when Abraham swore to his servant, do not take for my son a wife, from the Canaanites, and he sent him back to his house. And the servant, when he got there, he prayed to God and said, Lord, let the one that you have chosen be the one who she will offer me water from the well. She will also offer the animals water. And when Rebecca came, that's exactly what she did. So he didn't have to go on a wild goose chase. He didn't get any no's before he got his yes. He just got his yes. Who do we see get many no's before they got their yes? Woman with the issue of blood, right? She spent all she had, many physicians, and was not made better, but rather grew worse. And this can be a general application to anybody that sought their healing. If it wasn't the first time that they went out, usually they went for answers, here and there. But not in this case. They didn't have to search for far. It was right there by the gate. If we look at Jesus' ministry, we saw that sometimes he would tell them, after he healed them, tell no one what I've done for you. And one time we saw where he told the guy, but he went and he began to publish it abroad. And then, Jesus, he could not even enter into the city by the gate because it was so crowded, them thronging him. But here we have this animal waiting by the gate right there. Depending on what the Lord wants to, teach you, want you to, understand and grasp. He might not have that animal waiting by the gate for you. You might go by the gate and see a different one, and you ask, and you figure out that that's not the one. Then you have to walk around a little bit. We value things sometimes more when they're not, directly given unto us. When we have to work for it, when we have to earn it. There's a saying in life that anything that comes easy, maybe it's not that valuable. The things that come by much, effort. First of all, you learn more because you had to apply yourself more. The journey that you went on to gain it, that becomes a part of you, and it registers on a deeper level, and there's a deeper appreciation for the thing. So Jesus, he was very clear in his instructions. As soon as you be entered into the city, you shall see them. So the next one says, and if any man say, what do ye? Say unto them that the Lord hath need of him, and straightway they shall send him. So like I said, this covers, both scenarios that I stipulated. If it was by dream and they were warned that, they were foretold that he was coming, maybe they were given this key phrase that the Lord hath need of him, and then they would know. If it was just a work it out as you go kind of a situation, then no doubt that them saying this phrase, it will create such peace inside their minds that they would let the animal go. So the next one says, so they went in unto the city. They found the animal tied next to the door in the way where two ways meet. So they found it just exactly as Jesus told them. One thing about Jesus, he was always so specific. And he could give you so many, he could break things down. He could break things down to such a deep level. And the irony is that he was saying things that no man had ever even considered before. Imagine, saying all these things that nobody had ever, we which live in this day, we have his teachings. They've been taught and brought, and passed down generation to generation. We have all this knowledge. But imagine him saying it for the first time and being able to, break things down to such a level. So the next one says, and when they began to loose the colt, they said unto him, what doest thou? I mean, we live in the real world, right? In those days, animals was a man's main possession, and with his, his fields, his vineyard, his corn, his oil, his wine, his barns. Either he was, a raiser of things, whether it be animals or crops. But then, we also had, the tax collectors, the fishermen, Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sat at a receipt of customs when Jesus met him. But you don't play around with people, animals in those days. And you look at these two strangers coming to take this man's, colt that, hey, no man had ever even sat on this. The devil, he likes to interfere, but at the same time, the devil, he doesn't know, what God knows. And God knew the purpose for this animal. What if the devil was able to figure things out and then send his person to come and take this animal, saying unto this man, the Lord hath need of him. How would things have looked then? But we give thanks that the devil, he is not, he doesn't know the plan. I believe if he knew the plan, he would never have crucified Jesus, because it was the very blood that was supposed to free us. If he knew the plan, maybe he would have left Jesus alone. But then again, who said that he's that smart? Who said that he can reason, according to that many orders? And the last one says that straightway when they heard this, they let them go. I am Straw Greenhorn.